What we're looking at now is something called syntax errors, and before we look at what these are, we need to just double check that we understand what syntax is. And so syntax is the rules of the language. So for example, let's take a language like C#. The rule of the language is that I will have, let's say I'm doing assignment, the rules of the language will say that I must have a data type, and that must be followed by an identifier, so that's the variable name, then the assignment operator, then some value, and then a semicolon. And so an example of how I could do this, I could write in C#, int, so that's a data type, then a, that's an identifier, assignment with an equals, and 15, semicolon, and this is perfectly okay. This conforms to the rules of the language. Let's say I've got another language like JavaScript. I will say something like it must have a var, then it's got the identifier, then the assignment, and then a value followed by a semicolon. So again, if I look at an example, I could say var a assign 15. And so here, what we say is that both of these bits of code are syntactically correct. They conform to the syntax, they meet what the syntax should be, they meet the rules of the language. Let's say, as a programmer, certainly when you're beginning, this is fairly often you'll do this, let's say that you forget to put in a semicolon. Well, now this line of code is not syntactically correct, and we say that there is a syntax error. And the computer or the programming language won't know what to do with this. It won't be able to translate it into and compile it into machine code because it doesn't understand what you're doing. It needs a semicolon here. You haven't put it, so there's a syntax error. And if we look at these when they go on in a real language, and just because the IDE is a bit better, we're going to look at C# rather than JavaScript. If we take a look here, so what we've got here, and it's actually helping us out a little bit by telling us what's going on. So what we have here, the message here says that a semicolon is expected in line 13. And if we look to line 13 here, we see around here that there's a missing semicolon. So the rules of the language say that I should be saying int a assign 75 semicolon. But I haven't done that. Unfortunately, my IDE is picking up for me and saying you haven't put a semicolon where you should have done, so I don't know what to do. You've got a syntax error. Let's look at another example. So here we're meant to include, so the syntax of a while loop in C# will be while open bracket, then there'll be some expression which evaluates to a true or a false, close the bracket, and then curly brace, curly brace. And so what's happened here, it's saying that it's expected to see a bracket, however it's got this brace happening before it's seen the bracket, so it's saying there's an error here, there should be a bracket there, and that's another example of a syntax error. And the last one we'll take a look at here, so if you remember, the rules of a while loop are that it's got to be while, and then there's some expression inside the brackets which becomes a true or a false, and then you get the squiggly braces. And if we look here, we've got, it looks almost correct. We've got a variable here, and we've got the brackets, and we've got the while, and we've got the braces, everything's fine, but it's saying it can't convert an integer to a boolean. So if we see here, we've set up an integer a and assigned it the value of 10, that's absolutely fine, but then we've said while a, well, while 10, that's not true or false. It doesn't meet the conditions of the language, so I've got another syntax error here. It should be something like while a is less than 10 or something like that. And so there we've got 3 examples of syntax errors. And syntax error is very easy to understand. It's just you're not meeting the conditions of the language, you're not doing what the rules say in the language.